It's just this shit needs to be more compelling than what it is, just on an artistic level.
Lounging, son.
All right, welcome to the Comic Lounge. I have another awesome interview for you guys. I am talking to Erik Larsen, co-founder of Image Comics, creator of Savage Dragon. I mean, a legend in the industry. Welcome, Erik.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah. So first off, let's talk about 250. How does it feel to finally have that out?
It feels good. Yeah, it feels like I've kind of been holding on to a secret for a while, and then it's like, all right, now we got that out in the open, we can move on. But it's been really tricky to do things like draw upcoming covers and things like that, because it's like, well, I can't really just spoil this. Which, I mean, covers are problematic anyway, because then you're just, hey, all these characters on this cover made it. They're all fine. It's like, I kind of like the old days better, but that was, years and years and years ago, before we had any of this Diamond and all this other stuff. All you would have is the next issue blurb, and that's all you could go by. It would just have some cryptic title, and you'd just be like, the tower that tore the sky, what the hell does that even mean? And you just you just go, and it's like, all right, I guess I'm buying comics here. Off we go.
So have you been like having to hold back with your covers? Are those going to be the actual covers we've seen?
Yeah, those will be. But
okay.
It's just you do what you do. You do what you do.
Yeah. I wanted to jump back, to your early days real quick, before we get back into what's going on now.
How back we going? Way back.
Not too far back. But it kind of ties into the issue. Your first published work was The Dragon in graphic fantasy, correct?
Correct.
I was wondering, what was the decision to include that in 250? Because I've never seen that, and I've read Savage Dragon for years, and I've never been able to see that.
I thought it would be cool. I like. Originally, it ran in black and white, and my ability to print color at that point was problematic, to say the least. My dad was a teacher, and he taught workshops, and one of the things that he needed was to be able to print brochures and handouts and stuff like that. So he had bought a tabletop offset press. So we had this printing press in our house, and at one point it was like, we could print comic books on this. This would be awesome. So that's what graphic fantasy was. Is we printed it in my living room on this tabletop offset press. I was essentially the press man for my dad. It's like, all right, you're doing your workshops, I'll do my part. And so that's what I did. And so we printed up this comic, and it was problematic because tabletop offset presses, we were using paper plates. So usually at a big printer, and if you're printing up long runs of comics, you'll use either plastic plates, which are better, or the best is metal plates, because those things just don't break down at all. So I was using paper plates, and it just looks terrible. Like the colors start breaking up, the ink start breaking up pretty quick if you got any kind of huge contrast between black and white. We printed a bunch of them, and they're kind of a mess. If you go through the actual printed graphic fantasy comics, they're pretty iffy. So one of the ways of kind of hiding some of that is to color it. And so that's what I did now is like, I'll scan in those comics, clean them up as best I can. And there's a lot of things that drop out. The blacks drop out. There's just different problems. Things break up. And so I was like, I'll scan those in, and I'll color them, and this will be as beautiful as it could possibly be I was really using the kinds of colors that would have been accessible at that point. So I was using really the old school colors that were in regular comics at that time. So 1982, that meant 25, 25, 50, 100, and no other variables in between. So I just wanted it to look like, hey, there's this old school comic in the back of it, and here's some pieces. And I also like that there are things in those old comics that you can look at and go, oh, you still use this stuff,
Yeah.
38 years later. What the hell, man?
Yeah, that was cool to see you having all those characters in there. I mean, even Angel, his daughter, I was like, holy crap, like he had these characters in his head all the way back then, not just Dragon.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Mark and Peter Johnson, who are just in the last couple issues, who are like William Johnson's two kids. They're in the story that's in the issue 250 in costume, and they appeared in costume for the first time in Savage Dragon like 2 issues ago. So it's like, this has been in the works for 20 years. You planted these characters being born, and now they're adults, and it's like, holy crap, man, that goes back a ways. And that's just one of many things where I'm like, I'm constantly putting things in the book that are like, this is going to pay off way down the road, and it can, because it's set in real time and characters are going to age into their roles.
Yeah. I'm gonna take a question I had towards the end. I'm gonna jump it up since you kind of talked about it just now. Having the characters go in real time, was that always something that you had wanted to do if you were to launch your own Savage Dragon? And because of it, you're able to put stuff like real events, 9/11 and COVID in the current issue, which I thought was hilarious that I got to see, him dealing with that. Can you touch on that, on like the idea behind that?
That's sort of one of those things that fans talk about forever when they get to a certain age, and they just kind of go, oh, Superman's always 29. I just turned 30. I can't believe I'm older than Superman. It's so weird. Or Peter Parker, or whoever. Eventually you get to the point where you're starting to age out of the superheroes that you've been reading all these years. And I've often heard people say, well, wouldn't it be cool if the characters aged like I did and just grew up with me? Wouldn't that be awesome? And they don't think, well, yeah, but if they did that, Spider-Man would be 70 now, and Superman would be, 100 years old. They're not thinking that if it had been that way forever, all these things would have been essentially destroyed for them. But I can do that, and I think it's a kind of a cool idea. And it was just like, this would be a fun thing to do. People aren't going to necessarily get it right out of the gate that, oh, this is set in real time, and when he's referring to this particular president, that's still valid, 10 years later. It's like, that stuff still counts. That actually happened in that time period, and now we are where we are. George Bush Sr. was mentioned in the first issue of the Savage Dragon miniseries in 1992, because that was the president, and then every subsequent president since has been either mentioned or has appeared in the book. And it's just been like, oh, this is cool to be able to incorporate all this stuff. It can be problematic. The COVID-19 stuff in particular is kind of a minefield, because I'm drawing issues now that will be out in October. Well, I don't know what the world is going to look like in October.
Right.
So Malcolm and Maxine's kids should be starting kindergarten. What the hell does kindergarten look like at this point? I don't know, and it's like, so if I have them go to a brick and mortar school, like they're actually going to school, what happens if, I get to September and then it's like, oh no, they're not letting kids go to school. What the hell? Well, how do I deal with this? But I'm playing Maxine as being super overly cautious.
Yeah.
That kind of helps because then I can be like, well, maybe if kids are going to school, she's still going to homeschool them for a few months just to make sure that this is good, So I'll play it that way for a little while. But yeah, it's a mess. Plus, I have to be concerned with, well, what's the world look like, not only in the United States, but what's world look like in Canada? I don't live in Canada. I don't live in Toronto. I don't really know. So I have to just be on the news, seeing where are things and how is the world progressing there. And it's stuff to keep track of, but it keeps me keeps me hopping, keeps me on my toes.
When you were doing 250, did you have to rewrite anything to add in COVID?
249 definitely needed to have stuff rewritten because that was the first issue where I had incorporated COVID. And that one was a little weird because characters are out fighting in the streets and nobody has masks except for villains that had masks already. So characters are saying, how come you're not wearing masks? And it's like, well, you're not. With 250, it was definitely like, all right, we know this is going on, and this is how we're going to have to address this at this point. So yeah, definitely it was written and drawn with COVID in mind.
So I wanted to know a little bit more about the years between graphic fantasy and your time starting at Marvel. It doesn't have to be long, just, brief little of your time in between then and how you got to Marvel.
The goal was Marvel when I was a kid. Marvel comics were the comics I grew up with, and that was the stuff that I really loved the most. So, stay on target. And that was like what I was wanting to do. I self-published graphic fantasy. A couple of people who had ordered it through the mail, because we kind of gave copies to whoever we thought might review it. And so the Comics Buyer's Guide was a thing at that point, and they did something about it. I think it was mentioned in the Comics Journal and several other just small places here and there. There was just a mention of it and a picture of the cover. So I went from that. So a couple people bought it, and one of them was Gary Carlson. And Gary Carlson wanted to start up his own black and white comic book. So he started up Megaton. And so that was my first quote unquote professional gig, because I actually got a page rate. It was a sad page rate, but I was getting paid something to do comics. So it's like, all right, this is it. I'm starting this process. Once I started working with him, then I had some samples that could get me to the next level. And it was always just sending stuff to anybody with a pulse, anybody who could possibly give me any work anywhere. So I sent stuff to Americomics, which is AC Comics, and they gave me a little bit of stuff. I was corresponding with Jim Shooter and sending him stuff on a regular basis. He was the editor-in-chief at Marvel at the time. Mm-hmm. And I did get some work at AC Comics, so I was doing some stuff there. And it's just, you're not only building your resume, but you're figuring stuff out. Because there's an awful lot of stuff when you're just starting that you just don't know. How do pages, when you're drawing them, what do they look like when they're reduced in size? What works, what doesn't work? How do you place characters in panels so that the word balloons have a place to exist? And a lot of that stuff you just don't know when you're just starting this out. It's just all a mystery. And then once you're actually doing it for a while, it's like, oh, I should leave a definite dead area here so that people can be talking and stuff like that. You just kind of figure this stuff out. Anyway, so I ran into Jim Shooter at a Chicago convention, showed him my samples that I had been doing for other people, and he was like, "So you're a professional now?" And I was like, "Yes, I am." And he said, "How would you like to do a story for Marvel Fanfare?" Now, to me, it was like, well, Marvel Fanfare, that's like your best, coolest book. That's where you're putting all the good guys. That's pretty awesome to go from nobody to doing something for Marvel Fanfare. What I didn't know is that was code for how would you like to do an inventory job. So I jumped on it and I said, yeah, in fact, why don't we plot it here at the show? And he was like, all right. And so we did. We found time and went to the hotel bar and sat down and plotted out a Hulk versus Thor story, which ended up eventually appearing in an issue of Thor. And so once I had done that, then I had great samples because then it's playing exactly to my strengths, which was people kicking the crap out of each other. And it's like none of this sitting in a restaurant talking to one another. Here's guys destroying stuff. Those samples got me a fill-in issue on Spider-Man, and those samples got me run on DN Agents over at Eclipse Comics, and eventually I had a guy championing my stuff over at DC, Mike Gold, and Mike Gold wanted me on Teen Titans. And so he kept shoving me down their throat on Teen Titans. And I did a couple issues of Teen Titans Spotlight. I did a Secret Origins of Nightwing. And then I did a fill-in issue on Teen Titans. And that was it. I never got that book. But as it turns out, the Doom Patrol opened up. And so he got me on Doom Patrol. And then I just went on that for a year. And then it was like, what else has anybody got? Because my goal was to go to do stuff at Marvel. And so Todd was taking off. I had met Todd McFarlane sometime earlier. He was going to be leaving the Hulk. He had recommended me to take over the book. They weren't having it, but they did let me work on Todd's last issue. And so Todd did some thumbnails for that, and I worked over those and penciled his last issue. And it was just, this uphill climb of trying to get a regular gig over there and trying to get something. So they offered me the Punisher. I jumped on it and quickly found that I was not the guy for that book. And I was into Nova. I really wanted to do Nova. I had pitched Nova as a serial for Marvel Comics Presents that I would write and draw. And eventually the editor on that, Terry Kavanaugh, contacted me and said it was a go that we were going to do my Nova serial. So at that point, it was like, well, I can't do that and the Punisher. So I was like, I got to leave the Punisher because I got to follow my dream of doing Nova. And then I quit the Punisher and then found out, oh yeah, it turns out that Fabian Nicieza wants to do something different with him in New Warriors. So your story doesn't work anymore. You're now out of work. So I took whatever I could get, which was an Excalibur serial, which is like, I'm not a huge Excalibur fan, but it's like, I am just taking whatever you got. So I took that, and then that led to more Spider-Man because I was going all out and putting a lot of detail in it, and it was like, all right, well, you'd be a good guy to follow up Todd on Spider-Man, and we need a warm body on that. So
I love that run of Spider-Man, and that kind of leads me into what I was going to ask you. The numbers, I think they got higher when you, even after McFarlane left and you took over, and your popularity had to be at a pretty big high. What was that like, leaving during that popularity to go start Image? Like, what was that main catalyst?
It was a cool time for sure. following him on Amazing Spider-Man sales went up. Following him on his Spider-Man book was not so much the case. He had got that to a really high level. And I think really with Amazing Spider-Man is Todd had not only left, but he wasn't doing something else immediately. So there was this vacuum that was created. And it was, well, we like Spider-Man and this guy's pretty good. And he's kind of doing a half-assed Todd impersonation, at least to begin with. So we'll take that while it's there. But as soon as he was doing the other Spider-Man book, it's like, all right, now Spider-Man is just a hot commodity all around. And that book was huge, and Amazing Spider-Man was still doing real well. And in terms of going and doing Image Comics, we hoped it worked. You know, it was, you know, let's all hold hands and jump off the cliff together and hope there's something down there to catch us all. So you don't know. You know, all the time you're doing that, the question was, is this popularity transferable to something else? You know, it's a crapshoot. Yeah. You don't know. And had it completely belly flopped, those books that we had left weren't necessarily going to be open for us to return to. So, you know, it'd been a whole different story if it had just all gone into the crapper.
So I know one of the reasons too, at least on my perspective, I don't want to put words in anyone's mouth, or creators' rights, right? You guys were big proponents for it. I think Kirby was probably a huge example, Siegel and Schuster, the way that they were treated. You know, Kirby's been on my mind a lot lately. I've been talking to other creators. I just read the book that Tom Scioli put out. I was wondering if you could share a Kirby story.
I wish I had some good Kirby stories. I met him 3 different times at 3 different Chicago Comic Cons, and every time it was just a madhouse of people just running everywhere, and, you know, got to shake his hand and say hi and what have you. But I don't have any, you know, good pearls of wisdom or you know, stories where we went off and had any kind of a deep conversation at all. It was always very much superficial. I've heard good things, that sort of stuff. It's like, okay, that's awesome. And it was always one of those things where it seemed like, well, this guy's going to be around forever. I can take a flight down there and go out and hang out at his house later. You know, right now I got deadlines, and I never got around to it, and it's a regret for sure to never have made that trip, you know, because I would have liked to, but unfortunately I don't have any great awesome stories. I got to ink his pencils once on that Phantom Force book that we put out, and that was a real treat to be able to work on his actual pencils. But
yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things where it's just like, oh, it's awesome, I got to work with this guy, or this guy drew my character, or whatever. So I got to have my few little geek moments here and there.
And you brought Dragon to Image already almost fully formed. I mean, obviously there's a lot of differences between, you know, his first appearance technically and now. What was that always a plan of yours, like before, like going to Marvel and doing the work for hire? Did you always have that in the back of your mind that you wanted to do Dragon?
Dragon was one of those characters where I always thought at some point I'm going to write and draw this guy's adventures, and I'm going to do that for the rest of my career. And it was like, and I kind of kept wanting to put it off because I didn't know that I wanted to start the rest of my career right then and there, you know? Like, do I really got to do this now? So, but yeah, that was the guy. Basically, what I drew comics when I was a little kid. So like 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, all through high school, I was drawing my own comics. And they would just be 8.5 by 11 paper folded in half. And I would just write my adventures, and that would be my stories. And I did 100-page issues back then too, but I would do all of the pages, you know. So I did probably roughly 60 different comics. Deadly Duo was another one that I did those with a friend of mine, and so he would do one issue, and then I would do the next, and we'd kind of trade that book back and forth. And then on my own, I would do dragon stuff. So the dragon had gone from being one thing to another, and eventually it got to a point where he had Angel, and Angel was his little kid, and he was taking care of her, and his wife had been killed by the Bronze Man, and so I had this story that had all been in place, and this is where I was. And that's when I did graphic fantasy. That was kind of the end story from everything that had come before. I was just continuing with what I had already set in motion. So those stories with talking about there being an SOS, and talking about him having partner with Star, and all these other characters, all those things that were mentioned were comics that I had done when I was a little kid that nobody could ever see, and nobody can see because my house burned down. So those comics don't exist anymore. But when I was at Image, the idea with Savage Dragon was, I'm going to work towards those stories. I'm going to start in a different place, but I'm going to get to that point. And then once I'm at that point, then I'm free, man. I can go wherever I want to, but at least, you know, so I felt like I was really working towards a goal. And the idea was to eventually redraw those issues of graphic fantasy as issues of Savage Dragon, work them into continuity, and then go my own path from there. So that's what I did, and they ended up being issues 63 and 65 of Savage Dragon. Yeah, so for me, when people are like, "Oh man, Dragon being a cop," those are like the classic days. I'm just like, I just made him a cop because that seemed like a logical thing that might become this thing that he always was in my mind. He was always a superhero in my comics. He was never a policeman. So to have people now be glomming onto, no, he's a cop, seems kind of weird to me, because that wasn't my dragon. My dragon was the superhero guy who was raising a 5-year-old.
I mean, while I do like those days of when he was a cop, because I mean that's when I started reading it, or how I started reading it, I do love what it's become. I mean, it's insane what it's become, you know, over these 250 issues. 253 if you include the miniseries.
Yeah, I like where it's gone, and I kind of can't wait to get where I'm going too. At the same time, I like the whole process. I like the characters aging and new characters being introduced left and right, and lives being forever altered by this, that, and the other thing. It's just a lot of fun to me.
Speaking of new characters, much like I can only attribute it to the similarities of like Kirby. He constantly was creating, constantly, just like the fertile imagination that man had. And you as well. I feel like every time I'm opening a book, I'm seeing something, a new character. You know, how do you continue to come up with all these new characters and then juggle them within this world? I mean, I can only imagine.
I don't know what Jack's story was, but mine is it actually ends up being a weird kind of lazy to create new characters, because it's like, if I'm using an old character, I got to look up where they've been. I got to remember what their costume looks like. I got to do some research and figure out where their story is. I could just make up a new guy and I'm done. So it just, in some ways, it just feels like, oh, it's just easier to create something new than to have to do all the rummaging around, looking through my back issues, trying to sort all this stuff out. And also, you just get ideas for stuff constantly of just, oh, wouldn't it be cool if, instead of antlers, he had 2 big arms coming out of his head. They were just doing crazy stuff. It's like, all right, well, let's try that out, see what that looks like.
Let's talk about that cliffhanger in
All
250.
right.
Now we're going into 250. What the fuck?
Well, I kind of wish that I had been able to do some more grandpa stuff with a grandpa dragon. So there's a little bit of that in there. But I thought bringing regular dragon back from the dead is such a cheat. I didn't want to go there. So what I decided was, well, I had established when I did the merging of multiple worlds that there was one of the little shards in there was a panel that I had taken from Graphic Fantasy, and I just stuck it in there. So there's that dragon with his tiny little fin on his head. Mm-hmm. He's now part of the tapestry of, well, he's one of those characters who has existed. And so just thinking about it more and more, it was, what if I pull that dragon directly from Graphic Fantasy #2 and just be like, this is this guy's reality now. And so it was like, well, he's clearly not exactly the same guy that we last saw, because he's got the little fin. So what's the story with that?
Right.
I am working on one right now, which is kind of crazy, and that is I'm doing homages to Sunday funnies from various comic strips. So that one has been just kind of a real challenge and wild to work on. So every 2 pages is like a Sunday funny. So it's like a spread from, the Sunday funnies. So it's like I'm doing Popeye, I'm doing Dick Tracy, I'm doing Doonesbury. And so every time you flip the page, it's another comic strip. And it's kind of drawn in as close to approximate that style as I can. And usually it's somewhat gag oriented, but just depending on what the strip is. So the more serious strips are taken a little more seriously, and the wacky strips are more wacky. So my Kathy send up is very much in the mode of Kathy and stuff like that.
Yeah, I forgot about that issue. How hard has that been to is that issue taking you longer than like a regular issue for sure?
Yeah, so much longer. I'm gonna have to do some real scrambling once I'm done. There's no way I could maintain a monthly schedule if I was going to try to do that on any kind of an ongoing basis. Like every one of those spreads is taking me several days, because it's like you have to learn how to do everything. It's just like, I know what a hand looks like, but I don't know what a Kathy Guthwise hand looks like, and they're all over the map, so characters are going to suddenly having 4 fingers, and they're really different looking. It's been kind of crazy. At the same time, you want characters to seem somewhat on model. So like when I'm doing Popeye, he's not exactly built like Popeye. So he's still kind of got his own regular silhouette, while the rest of the characters kind of have more of that feel. So it's been wild to do, but it's definitely way too time consuming. And I think readers will look at it and think, man, he must have just batted this thing out, because it's way simpler, because it's like all these old art styles, or even new art styles, depending on who I'm doing. It's like, okay, the Foxtrot guy draws way simpler than I've ever drawn in my life, but every single piece of it needs to be referenced, because it's like, okay, how does he draw people's mouths open, and how does he draw this and this and this? Just trying to keep it as on model as I can. It's just been a nightmare.
That's 252?
That's 252. That's
all right, cool.
And then from then it's on to the next thing.
Cool. Can't wait, man. You spent time as publisher from 04 to 08, if my memory serves correct.
I'll go with that. Whatever.
So
I've been saying I haven't been publisher for 10 years now for a while, so I guess it's 12 now.
So what was I just wanted to, wondering if you could share a little bit of what that time was like for you, and maybe how it affected your creativity and your output for Savage Dragon.
Well, it definitely slowed that to a crawl, because there was a lot of stuff where I thought we had a bunch of books where logos weren't particularly readable, and some of the books I didn't think were especially strong. There were a lot of people who were coming on board trying to do books. They would fail, and then stories would never get finished. So there was just, it was kind of problematic. So I kind of took that on as, well, let's try to write this as much as we can. Jim Valentino's contacts were much more in the independent comics world, you know, the small press world, those sorts of things, whereas mine were more mainstream. So part of that was just, let's get more commercial books for crying out loud, and get some of that stuff going. And then another big part of it was to try and help books that were already going to become better books. And so there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes stuff where I'm talking to people about improving their logos or doing character sketches for people who already had ongoing books, that I could go, have you thought of maybe going this direction with this character's costume, and that would streamline it and make it a stronger visual and blah, blah, blah. And that's all the stuff you wouldn't even know that I had anything to do with. But it all took time, you know, and it was all taking time away from what I wanted to do, which was my book. But it was, you know, it was really nice to be able to be part of an office and to be coming in and have a drawing board and an office and be able to kind of shoot the breeze with people and just be part of that. And I hadn't been part of that for a while. And it's like, oh, there's other human beings. We can talk and that sort of thing. So that was kind of the nice part. But it really did shut down the book for a while there, because I just wasn't able to concentrate on it fully. Once things were going in a direction that I thought was stronger, and the book seemed to be settling in and doing better, then it was like, all right, I'm going to turn this over to Eric Stevenson and let him continue.
Yeah.
See where this goes, you know. He was Jim Valentino's right-hand man, so he had worked with Rob Liefeld and worked with Jim Valentino prior to that, so he has really been with the company in some form or another almost since the very beginning. So he really much was, he had his sea legs by the time he was actually the publisher, so, you know, good on him.
I was wondering, with you know, with so much upheaval in the industry and the world in general, I mean, we have, you know, with the world, it's COVID, you know, the social justice, stuff like that. We got stuff going on in the industry with, you know, creators and the way they're treating other creators. I don't want to like really use the exact words. And then we also have DC leaving Diamond. So there's just been it feels like there's been so much happening in this like small window of time. I was wondering if you had any, in your opinion, what do you think the industry needs in order to survive and thrive during these times?
I mean, it all always comes down to the material. It always comes down to people doing good work. If there are good books, people will seek out those good books and talk about those good books, and you know, things are better when there are good comics driving the industry. So more than anything, it needs to be a focus on that sort of thing, and less so on big company-wide crossovers, which they're a short-term fix is the problem, and it's tough to have those kind of conversations with other publishers and say, oh, that thing which is totally working for you, you need to stop doing that because it's killing the industry. But
Yeah.
the thing that they are doing, which is totally working for them, is killing the industry, and they need to do something about killing the industry because that doesn't work out real well for the rest of us, or for them in the long term either. You know, because people will get to the point where like I'm reading a book, I'm reading a book, I'm reading a book. Suddenly it's now it's crossing over with this huge mega event.
I know.
And, you know, some new people are going to jump aboard for the new mega event, but some people are like, yeah, I'm out, man. I can't read my book anymore. And so, you know, as those other people drop off and the new people jump on, the new people are fickle. They're not necessarily sitting there going, I'm in for the long haul. They're in for the event. And when the event is over, they're out of there. So then it's like, oh, now numbers are dropping below where they were. I guess we need to do another event again. And then it becomes, well, the next event isn't as big as your previous event, but it's, you know, and it just becomes over time, you're just chipping away at your fan base. And that's not strong, and that's not a good long-term thing, you know, and they need to start looking at their solid success stories, which is those little runs by good creators that people just glom onto and love those books, you know. Those, I mean, and now my examples are all like a million years old, but you know, Frank Miller coming on Daredevil and turn that ship around. Walt Simonson on Thor turned that ship around. You know, Fantastic Four with Byrne or whatever, and you'll have new ones too, where suddenly Daredevil will be hot again because somebody good gets on the book and people love it, or Captain America is suddenly a big deal again and people love it. But you need those books that creators always wanted to work on, and now they're working on them, and they're just doing the work of their life because this is their dream gig. And those are going to be those books that are ultimately going to be better for the industry and better for those comic book companies, you know? Find the thing that these guys love, let them do the thing that they love and make a great comic, and then have there be those bright spots in your comic book company. You know, right now it's like, I don't know, Immortal Hulk seems to be something that people are like, oh, I love this book now. And
that's pretty good.
You know, but it's like, that's not a book which is part of some huge mega event at the same time. And once it is, then it'll be like, oh, let's make Immortal everybody. And it's like, okay, now you screwed it all up. You can't do that.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on the events and the crossovers. I mean, I just want to read a story. I don't want to feel like I have to read 60 different comic books in order to get that story, which is what it seems like they tend to market it as. You know, I'm not saying they're forcing you. They're like, oh, well, you can just read this. But if you really want the full scope, you got to get all of these books as well, you know? So it is frustrating.
I don't do it. Those are jumping off points for old readers, and that's where I'm at right now. It's like, yeah, sorry.
Yeah. With DC leaving Diamond, I was wondering if you had any, I mean, I feel a certain type of way just as a fan. I work at a shop, so I also see it from the retailer side as well.
From the retailer's point of view, it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
Because they're suddenly going, so now I got to pay for different boxes coming from different places. Their costs have got to be going up.
Yeah.
They're not getting the, you know, Diamond had these thresholds. If you sell so many copies, then you're paying less. So people will be trying to hit those plateaus so that they're paying less per copy and less per shipping and all this stuff. And now that you take DC and pull that out and have it be somewhere else, suddenly those plateaus are in different places. Suddenly you're paying for two different boxes coming from two different locations, and it's a goddamn nightmare, man. I don't envy them at all. It's not good. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, increased competition is a good thing, and blah blah blah. It's like, yeah, maybe if it forces Diamond to get their act together and do a better job, maybe it's better for all in the long time. If DC does what Marvel did and they just screw the pooch and they have to come crawling back to Diamond in a year. All right, what did you really accomplish?
Yeah, that's what I kind of see the correlation between what Marvel did in the 90s with Heroes or something. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, oh, we're gonna do this thing. We're gonna buy our own trading card company, and then we're gonna buy our own coloring house, and then we're gonna buy our own this and that. And they acquired all this stuff, ran it all into the ground, and then here we are. At one point, Marvel was bankrupt, so.
It looks like DC could go down that same path. So,
hey, can we get that going
on? So speaking of retailers, I was wondering, what do you think publishers should be doing to maybe not necessarily help the retailers, but maybe to kind of excite people into going back into the shops and to kind of lift up the retailer in this hard time, because people aren't maybe spending as much as they were before, especially with like unemployment going down and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, it's a mess. Because you got unemployment where it's at, which is spiraling out of control. You got a lot of people who are just going, I'm not wearing a mask outside. You're not going to muzzle me. And it's like, all right, great. So we're clearly not going to get this virus contained. So that's awesome. And then stay-at-home orders, and then you've got businesses that are shutting up for good, just closing the doors. It's like, if everybody just would have stayed home and worn a mask, we could have been over this in a month and a half. How do we get people back in the store? First, we need to get these places to be safe. So that's going to take some doing. And I don't know that that's something any one of us can do. Right now, I don't even know if my local store is open. I haven't been to a comic store in 4 months. Because I don't do that. It's like I'm not going to be leaving the house. I got a wife. She doesn't want to get it. I've got a kid. He doesn't want to get it. So what do we do? I mean, all we can do is the best work we're capable of doing. And the unfortunate part is that's all what we thought we've been doing all this time anyway. It's not like everybody's sitting there going, well, I'm going to do some poor work. But it's like everybody thought they were doing their best work. So it's not like we've all been storing up on this awesome stuff that we've just been waiting for the right moment to pounce on. I think people do need to start thinking of, stay on a book, do a little run on a book, do something that can be collected, do something can be a focal point for fans' attention, so that it can be that thing that people glom on. I mean, there was those periods of time where everybody was reading Watchmen, everybody was reading Camelot 3000, everybody was following Daredevil, and when there were these events, it would be, this is the thing that we have this community thing, we're all reading this one thing. And we kind of don't have that anymore. Now it's so scattered with so many books, right, that it's like any one thing, and it gets lost in the morass of there just being so much stuff. So it makes that focus a a lot more difficult. You know,
Yeah.
you know, really the best thing for this industry at this point, honestly, would be if half these books just went away. You know, I
I
mean,
agree.
it's
Yeah.
a terrible thing to say,
No, but it's true.
but
I
you
completely
know,
agree.
I mean, if I'm a Spider-Man fan, there's 8 Spider-Man books coming out every month, and it's like that's a crazy amount of material.
Same with Batman too. Like
You
12
know,
Batman books.
yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
yeah.
need that.
All these Batman related books, and it's like I understand you're sitting there going, well, this is the only way we can't launch a successful other title. All we can launch that's successful is Batman, so we're doing more Batman. And it's like, yeah, what about not? What about doing way less material, period, having those things be uniformly excellent and not having there be all this bottom tier stuff that's just kind of limping along.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true, you know, and it's also it's a matter of marketing too. I think, you know, they put their marketing energy towards a Batman book, but you don't promote some of the lesser tier characters, B list, C list, whatever. You know, like I'm a huge Green Arrow fan, for instance, you know, and they could put a good creative team on Green Arrow. They could. They just choose not to, and they choose to put up Batman book number 13, number 14, 3 books of Harley Quinn, this
Yeah.
and that, and it's just
Well,
like,
as a creator who's worked in that thing, your tendency is to go, well, what books are doing well? Because if a book does well, that means there's a royalty check in the end of that, and that means I can feed my family, you know? So
mhm.
I want to be on those good books. What are those good books? And if they're not Green Arrow, I'm sorry, man. Green Arrow, you're not getting you can't attract the A-list talent to the C-level books, and in some cases, some of the creators have priced themselves out of the possibility of working on those books because it'll be this book generates this amount of money. If your page rate is such that we can't cover our nut on this book, we can't afford to have you working on this book. You know, there's cases where there are creators saying, "Oh, I'd really love to work on Guardians of the Galaxy. I'd really love to work on whatever book that you happen to be in love with." And the publishers just have to say to people, we can't afford to have you on that book. It doesn't sell well enough for us to be able to do that. And it's like, well, okay, that sucks.
Yeah.
You know, how are you going to build that book into being a top tier book if you're always putting bottom tier talent on it?
Right.
And I was like,
Yeah.
you know, it's frustrating. It's frustrating all around, but the numbers aren't what they were, you know, and the numbers haven't been what they were for quite a while. And it's all spread out over so many books now that it's hard to build up the numbers on any one thing because it's so scattered. There's so much product out there. Which,
And what?
you know, it's like great because there's choices, and then you know, and everybody loves something. So to say to somebody, we got to get rid of a bunch of this, I'm sure everybody reading would be like, I've got my suggestions. Why don't you get rid of all these books? And it's like, well, those are the ones that are doing well. You know, we got to get rid of the ones you like. Like nobody wants to do that.
That's true. What do you think or wish that you saw more of, like in terms of stories or genres that maybe we don't see enough of, instead of, like we were talking about, we see the same recycled ideas kind of with 12 Batman or 10 Spider-Man, you know? What do you think we should see more of?
I mean, I do think that there is a place for, Jesus, I don't know. It gets tough, you know, because I can look back at when things were successful and it was those splashy Image comics in the 90s. It's like, that's when things were exploding, where you would open up a comic and you go, I like this character because look how awesome this is. And we're not getting enough of that kind of artwork from artists, and I wish there was a little more shameless pandering from the part of artists who are just like, let me have there be those cool, whatever character you're working on moments, where, oh, this is an awesome drawing. But part of that is the writing too, where you've got writers who are just going, let's do a 6-page sequence where Aunt May is painting her apartment and Peter's helping. It's like, holy crap, man. Bullet through my brain trying to draw this goddamn thing. It's like, crying out loud, what are you doing to me? And it's so I wish writers would focus more on individual comic books, because as long as we're selling comic books in this comic book format, those individual issues have to seem worthwhile. And what, from my vantage point, is very often they're not. They're fragments of a chapter rather than a chapter. And it really needs to be a complete thought, and there needs to be something in there that's either, really strong, visually compelling, or really strong writing compelling. Something in there to make me go, holy shit, I can't believe it. They did whatever. And we need more of those kinds of things. And it doesn't matter what genre that is. You can do a great romance comic, but there better be something really gripping in there that makes you go, you gotta check this out. You can do an awesome Western comic. I haven't seen it, but I'm sure it can happen. We go, this is beautiful, and look at the way this is written, and look at these characters are doing. I can't believe it. It's just this shit needs to be more compelling than what it is, just on an artistic level. I just wish there was more Jack Kirby, less. I mean, I don't. Pick a name.
Yeah, I can pick one in my head. I'll pick one in my head.
Right.
It's funny that you bring up those old '90s Image stuff, because that's what I've been reading most of my time during lockdown. There's no new books. I just went back and I just started reading all my old stuff, filling in gaps of some of my collection from the old stuff, and it's like they're fun, dude. You know what I mean? Like they're so awesome to look at. And while maybe writing on some is not as strong as others, it's still like the energy that you get from those books is unmatched.
An energy to it that isn't in a lot of other stuff. But it's like my son really got into reading Scott Pilgrim, and he really loved that Scott Pilgrim book. And that's the only comic that I've been able to kind of force down his throat. And he really embraced it. It was just like, oh, this is awesome. Is there anything else like this? It's like, no. That's the end of the road for you, buddy.
Yeah.
There's nothing else like this. Yeah. And it's like there's nothing I can point him to that is like, oh, this was super cool, And it's like I could go, well, what about Zot? When Zot started off, it was really cool, and it was crazy, and it was in this other world, and there was all this cool stuff going on. And then they came over to our Earth, and it was kind of boring. And it's like, oh, damn it. Why did you go that route? It's like all the cool stuff, and it's not. And then it became, and to me, that's the industry at this point. It's like we had all this cool stuff, and it was visually compelling, and these comics were, all they needed was somebody to write some better stories to that, and to have there be more closure in those stories, and have there be some funnier dialogue or more clever dialogue, or have this go someplace. But instead, it's like, oh, let me do this courtroom drama in this comic book. So, crap. There's nothing visually interesting about what you're doing. You're just not finding a way.
Yeah.
I guess I did my story that took place during COVID-19 in issue 250, but I'm sitting there going, I'm going to find a way to make this visually interesting. God damn it! I'm going to do some pages that are going to be cool looking, even though they're essentially people hanging around their apartment. It's like, oh, there'll be a big half-page shot of Malcolm's head, and there are going to be inset panels, and there're going to be crazy stuff going on. So it's like, well, these characters are just hanging out at home, but that page looks awesome, you know? And and that's been my goal at this point is let's find a way to make comics visually exciting again. So that's my drive. That's where I'm at. It's like, bring back the 90s.
Hell yeah, dude, hell yeah.
Way, you know? Let's find a way to do the visually interesting part of the 90s at the same time that we take these other tools that we've learned over the time, like how to make the story stronger and how to do more compelling dialogue and more in-depth dialogue. We get to know these characters better. It's like there's stuff there, but I almost wish I could sit there and just be like, all right, industry, gather around. Let's talk about this stuff and figure this stuff out. Here's what you're doing right, and here's what you're doing wrong. And I can almost go through all these comics and just be like, this scene should have stopped with this panel, and yet you did 3 pages beyond this scene. You know, it's like, sit down and watch something that's smart and crisp and clipped, where you can just go, oh, look, they did this scene where here's the information they wanted to convey. They need to show this much information, and they managed to do that in a page rather than 6 pages. It's like, you don't need all this other stuff. Yes, character if they're saying all the time, but there's so many comics where you have this ping pong dialogue that may sound natural, but it's not moving the narrative at all. You know, it's like having characters that are just like, oh, I want to go to the store. Really? What store? You know, down just the corner store. Oh, I thought you were going to go to blah, blah, blah. Then if you're going to blah, 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 I'd come with you. But yeah, they don't have anything at the corner store. That place sucks. And it's like this back and forth of characters just saying nothing. It may sound like the way real people talk, which is, you know, hey, thumbs up to that. But if it's not furthering your narrative, you're not getting anywhere. You're just kind of spinning your wheels. And you actually need to get to that thing because that's the interesting thing. Then once you're to that interesting thing, then get to the next interesting thing as quickly as humanly possible. You know, and one of the things that I've just because I'm doing this book set in real time, I'm sitting there confronted with constantly is you got to cover a month worth of events in every issue. So, you know, you better be on it. You better not linger. I don't want to see you spending 6 pages on some scene where things aren't getting accomplished because you're just chewing away at this limited real estate we got. And you got to get on to the next thing because you've got all these seeds that you need to plant in order for this thing to grow. So get on it. I mean, the book is got a clip to it, you know, where I'm doing 1-page scenes. It's like, here we go. We're touching in on this. Here's the vital information you need. Next scene. Here's the vital information you need. Next. And there's no fat in it, you know, and that's what I prefer just as a storyteller is to just, you know, when I'm sending in a plot to somebody or doing anything, it's like, how come Erik's books have 15 different scenes in a 20-page story, and this other guy's book has 3 scenes, and 2 of them are people just doing mundane shit that is not visually interesting.
Yeah.
God. Ugh.
And I wanted to ask before we get out of here too, what are you currently working on? Is it just Savage Dragon for now? Because I know you did do that Captain America story for Marvel, the end
Yeah.
book. I was
At the moment, I'm just doing Savage Dragon. I'm chipping away at I want to do an ant book at some point, and so I'm chipping away at that. I've got not quite 20 pages done on an issue of that. So I want to have a chunk of that done before I start releasing it. But
okay.
yeah, this issue that I'm working on of Savage Dragon is taking up so much more time. But that's killing whatever free time I have to do to monkey around on other stuff. So I just want to get this issue behind me.
Yeah.
So get on to the next bunch of stuff.
Once again, I want to thank you for being here and chatting with me today. It's a pleasure and an honor, man. Can you share with everyone where we can find you on, online, social media, all that stuff?
Twitter, it's just Erik J. Larsen. So it's ErikJLarsen. I'm on Facebook somewhere. Just look for somebody with my name in my head, and then that's probably me. And then it's just imagecomics.com and savagedragon.com are the 2 places where that I'm really part of, I guess.
All right, cool. And I'll throw the links for all that stuff down in the comments below. And then, yeah, so thank you so much. I can't wait for the next issue of Savage Dragon. Very excited after what you told me that the rest of the listeners will not be able to hear. But yeah, thank you so much. And I can't wait to do this again sometime.
All right. Okay, man.